Welcome back to the Cream City Club podcast. I am Spencer Michaelis, and I'm here as always with Gunnar Amelunk. Gunnar, how are you doing this Thursday evening?
I'm good. I had a long week of jury duty, so just a little tired and I guess just a little gas from that. But new experience for me. But I know you had a busy week too, Spencer. So how you doing? Busy
Um,
weekend, I guess I should say. You had a long
yeah.
weekend plus this week combined.
Oh, of course. Yeah. I mean, was I gotta ask, was it hard to send a guy to the chair like that, or?
It's just a complete mixed bag of emotions, honestly, the whole week. So I couldn't even describe it.
Um, yeah. No, we had our first weekend of games for coaching and for our team, and 0-3 weekend. So record wise, not great, but we saw some good things. And honestly, if we just cleaned up some of the easy stuff, things would have went a lot better for us, I think. But some very good things to start off the season. I got another one, like you said, coming up. Leave Saturday at 6 in the morning for the bus, so that's gonna be a fun one. Um, but yeah, three more this weekend, and then we got a week until we leave for Florida, and then the season really gets rolling. So, uh, you may have noticed if you're listening that we have taken a little bit of time between these last two episodes with Gunner's jury duty and my coaching stuff and everything. Busy, busy week for us. We're gonna do our best to get two a week out still, but with my season starting, it might be closer to one. We'll see what happens. We'll do our best, like I said, and hopefully we can get a Bucks one and a Brewer one out each week. But this particular one is going to be a Brewer focused episode. But before we get into that, if you're listening and you haven't yet subscribed, please take a moment to do so on whatever platform you are listening on. Rate us 5 stars if you believe that is what we have earned. Follow us on Twitter at the Cream City Pod to stay up to date on these episode releases. And yeah, Gunnar, what do we got going on today?
Tonight, we're going to be talking about Brandon Woodruff is back. That seems like very old news for us, but like you said, we haven't recorded in a week or so. So we do have to talk about that. He's officially back. Gary Sanchez is also officially a Brewer. That also happened in the last week. We got some spring training updates as well, just going over some players, not so much the games themselves, but more players specifically. Brewers social media. We've seen a lot of hype, I guess you could kind of describe it as, and we're here to talk about it because it's a lot of excitement right now is watching all these prospects and everything. And then we asked you guys for some listener questions and you received, or we did receive those. So we'll be going over those as well. So Spencer, let's start with the biggest news and what we were excited about last week. Like I said, it's kind of anticlimactic now, unfortunately, but for us, we're still excited about it because we haven't really talked about it face to face yet. But Brandon Woodruff is back for 2 years. 17.5 million guaranteed with the mutual option for 2026. Spencer, I guess, what are your overall thoughts before we kind of break down the contract just on Brandon Woodruff being back? I know we've discussed it a little bit about the possibilities, but how do you feel now that he's officially back?
I am so happy. I'm still so happy, even though, like you said, this is probably learned like a week and a half ago that this was happening. Maybe even more. Might be 2 weeks almost at this point. But I'm just so happy when that notification came through because I have push notifications on for almost every baseball writer in existence that breaks news. So John Heyman tweets it out, and I think it took me 20 seconds after he tweeted it to quote tweet it with just yes, all caps, because I was so pumped. I was sitting in bed when it happened. I just like jumped out of bed, started to get my day going because it got me so hyped up. Um, he's we've talked about it on here, and whether he ever pitches for the Brewers again, I'm so happy they brought him back. He is a perfect teammate by every account. I mean, it's not even that people don't ever say anything bad about him. It's the fact that everybody goes out of their way to praise him at every opportunity. Like, it's not that you don't hear anything about Brandon Woodruff, like, he's got he can be a hothead or whatever. No, it's that he cannot even be part of the conversation. And then somebody's like, yeah, I just love playing with Woody. Like, he's the best teammate I've had. The guy is just always there for you, always ready to go to battle with you. And we've seen it. When he's out there performing, there's very few pitchers in baseball better than him. I think he might have the lowest. He has one of the lowest ERAs since 2021. I saw that on Twitter. Obviously, Corbin Burns was up there too as one of the best, but he's not going to pitch this year. He's going to make. I guess we should go through each year here quickly of the contract. So he's going to make 2.5 million this year. He said it's almost 100% certainty that he's not going to pitch this year. It's probably 99%. If everything goes perfect, maybe he's back as a pen arm at the very end of the year. But my guess is the Brewers are just going to be safe with him either way and push it to 2025. And in 2025, he'll make 5 million. And then that mutual option that Gunnar touched on is in 2026. So it's $20 million for the mutual option, but it's a $10 million buyout, which means the 2.5 this year, 5 million in 2025, and then the $10 million buyout is all guaranteed. So that's the 17.5 million. But it pushes the money down the road a little bit. It seems unlikely a mutual option is going to get picked up. Rarely does. It's not something you I think Aramis Ramirez is like the last person I can remember that happening to at all. So it's very uncommon for that to happen, but he clearly wants to be a Brewer. They talked about Todd Rosiak reported that he had basically signed with another team, and then the Brewers came calling, and he backed out and came back to the Brewers. So I'm just, I don't know if he'll ever pitch again. If he does, we could have an absolute steal on our hands for 2025, paying him basically $15 million. He still could be one of the better pitchers in baseball. Even if he's not fully back to form, he could be a good pitcher because of the way he competes, because of just that bulldog type mentality that we've talked about before, and the fact that he's going to believe in himself more than some people might coming off an injury, just because that's the way he kind of is wired. But I just, I'm just going to be so happy to see him sitting in that dugout and being around the team again. And I don't think we ever talked about it, Gunnar, when we talked about him before, but that press conference he had right before the Diamondback series when the news broke and he was, I mean, he was holding back tears talking about how much he loves this team and how much he loves this clubhouse and how badly he wants to be out there. And just another sign of like why people love him as a teammate, why he's so easy to root for, and why even if he had signed anywhere else, I mean, literally at even the Cubs, even somewhere like that, I would have been rooting for Brandon Woodruff because he is one of the best people and players that the Brewers have had. And I would have no ability to find hatred in my heart for Brandon Woodruff. So, yeah, Gunnar, what were your thoughts when you first saw it break?
First, we got to acknowledge that you semi called it first. You started the breadcrumbs a little bit when this was probably back in 2023. You might even threw those
Yeah, I believe
breadcrumbs out.
December.
Um, and then I kind of brought it up again going into this year is like, well, he's still out there. It's a possibility, and it makes a lot of sense for us. So we don't want to say we called it, but we might have called it here, guys. But no, like I said though, it was very not obvious, but we knew that he probably wanted to come back because as we signed him, he said he had unfinished business. Nobody wants to end their tenure like that. It just kind of, I mean, you talked about it too with his last press conference. It was a weird exit, although he had a great season again, short season, but it was a great season at that. He's been on a great run, so it's just weird to think about. He's been so good, but it was a weird ending, and then it's just like we talk about end of an era. It did feel like an end of an era with now we didn't know Corbin, I guess. Well, he did leave at that point, but Corbin's leaving. Hader left a couple years ago. Now it would have been Woodruff, Braun's out, like all the guys that were a part of that group 2018, 2019. That successful run that we had. Pat might even talked about it too. It didn't feel the same if he wasn't here. So we talk about that presence in the clubhouse, him being just here this year is enough. And I'm really confident in that too. Like his presence, there's very few guys who he's probably you're never going to be able to see what he equates to wins, even though he's not on the field. It sounds super stupid, but him being able to pump guys up, giving advice to people, how many young pitchers are we going to see this year in the starting rotation that he's going to give advice to that's going to go unnoticed? He was a top-ish prospect, I guess you could say too, but he's a guy who's always worked for it. And we don't have necessarily outside of like Miz Gasser would probably kind of be close to what type of prospect he was, like a 100-ish prospect on the border there. But he's just going to give so much advice to those young guys. And with that being said, though, you can go into next year and even the end of this year, I'm getting my hopes up like we can make the World Series, and then maybe we see Brandon Woodruff jog out, and I'd probably break down crying at that point. But next year, he's going to get the opportunity to pitch, and like you said, I'm going to bet on him being good. I don't know if the stuff's going to be the same. I don't know if he's going to look the exact same, but based on what he is and what we know him as, I would expect him to compete and be a good pitcher. And then the year after that with that buyout, worst case, $10 million is kind of like you paid him $15 million next year, which is basically like what you would value him at anyways. So it's not like that's a big hit. And whatever, $10 million in that season. That's not a big hit either. $20 million if he is performing, like you said, no one really picks it up. But Woodruff, being that he likes it so much here, and if he was performing, that's a fair offer too. If he is performing that well, and we could probably make that work even at that point with our young roster. So it's interesting, and I'm just excited that he's back. Like I said, I guess to get more to my initial reactions. I know you being a pitcher, you can probably relate to him a little bit more, but he just feels like a Milwaukee Brewer. And you talked about some of those teams that maybe he could have gone to. You mentioned the Cubs. I was slightly nervous because it did make a lot of sense to go there, but and he did. We don't know what the team he did confirm to go to or whatever. He maybe verbally agreed to it. I don't know what the exact verbiage there is, but it did make a lot of sense for him to go there. And he we don't know what the money is either, but like this season, 2.5 million, it feels like someone could have outbid us there too. So it's almost felt like he was just waiting for like, please Brewers, give me something close because I want to come back that much. Like I just need you guys to work with me a little bit here. So I'm glad
Yeah.
that we did. Um, but just speaking about that contract, I guess you touched on it too, and I just touched on it, but none of that bothers me whatsoever. And we should talk about, I guess we did get rid of Jemiah Jones here, DFA'd him. I'm willing to make that trade, Spencer, I guess is what I'm saying. He had a good couple moments though with the Brewers, of course, but yeah. Did you have any lasting thoughts on Jemiah Jones, I guess? Did you?
No, I honestly he had one of the coolest moments of last year with that
Yeah.
hit the first I think that was his first swing as a Brewer when he hit the
Hmm.
bases clearing double against the Cubs and probably the biggest comeback win of the season for the Brewers right around July 4th, whatever that series was. I don't remember the exact day, but I did see the Yankees actually claimed him today. So the Yankees are going after everybody at the Brewers DFA because they took Clayton Andrews and Jemai Jones. So I doubt he's going to have much of a chance to make that roster, but at least it gives him another spring training in an MLB camp here. So I'm rooting for him. He seemed like a really good dude from the couple interviews we got, and from what I've heard of him before, and he was a big prospect at one point. He was a top 100 guy with the Angels at one point. So who knows? He might work out, but plenty of infield depth at the moment for the Brewers, and we'll touch on some of those guys later. But yeah, just to wrap up Woodruff, I'm just very excited to see how this goes. And like I said, if it doesn't work out, that's a $17.5 million deal I'm still willing to make for 2 years and have no problem with it. It's worth the risk. It's worth getting that guy back in the clubhouse, and there's plenty of reward on the other side of it if things work out for him. So
Hmm.
I guess the other deal we had that became official in the last 2 weeks or whatever since we last recorded, Gary Sanchez, which became official shortly after the Woodruff deal. And I think that timing actually became on purpose after a little while. But we did find out that it was a physical, an issue with the physical that was holding up the deal, like we had kind of guessed beforehand. It was actually a wrist incident, like we had guessed beforehand, but it was a separate incident from when he was lifting. He messed up the wrist hand, the same one that he had broke last year, but that had healed at this point, and then he hurt it while he was lifting. So it held up physical. He ended up reworking the deal, like we had kind of guessed as well, from 1 year, $7 million guaranteed to 1 year, $3 million guaranteed, with incentives to get it back up to $7 million. I'm guessing those are. I don't think we've seen them yet, but my guess would be their game played or
Yeah.
plate appearances or something along those lines. Just more, hey, if you're healthy, you make the money, but if you're not, you might not. So good to see that got worked to the finish line because I was not looking forward to Eric Haas and Austin Nola being the options. Obviously, like I touched on quickly, the Brewers signed Woodruff first so that they could clear one 40-man spot by DFAing Jemai Jones. And then they were able to put Woodruff on the 60-day IL to make room on the 40-man for Sanchez. So that's why that order happened on the signings. And then Austin Nola, like I just talked about, was subsequently released and then signed by the Royals on a major league deal. So good for him. He got a guaranteed major league deal. I think it's kind of important to note here that the Brewers didn't have to release him. They could have very easily let him stay in camp. I'm sure he had an opt out probably 5 days before camp ends. That's usually when the first opt out is for players. But they could have stuck around with them. They could have forced, if they knew the Royals were interested, they could have said, hey, give us a prospect for him, like give us some sort of lottery ticket. I think there's a lot of goodwill that is bought when you show you give a player this type of favor where it's like, hey, we brought you in with the understanding that you would have a chance to compete for a spot, that's becoming a lot less likely. Sounds like you have a pretty good chance to go somewhere else. We're going to let you go. We're not going to push anything here. We're not going to make things difficult for you or the team. We'll let it happen. And the next time somebody's in Austin Nola's position, a former player or a formerly good player who might be looking at a minor league deal, you have to think that they're going to be more interested in the Brewers because of that type of favor that they showed to somebody in their position already. And I think the Brewers do a lot of stuff like that. And we've talked about it when we talked about like the minor leaguers and the Jackson Churio stuff, how it's viewed as a family and they try to do right by the players as often as possible. That's just another example of it. It's never, I'm sure there's players who feel like they were wronged by the Brewers. There's players in every organization who are in that position. But I think the Brewers do genuinely try to do their best with that type of stuff. And I think they obviously do it for good reasons, but there's also reason to do it just because of what I said before. It might help you with another player in the future. So I thought that was good for Nola. It was cool to see him get a chance at a legit backup spot, probably for Salvador Perez, who I have so many Salvador Perez takes. It's not even funny, but I'm not going to get him off in this Brewers pod. But yeah, hopefully he gets some playing time. Hopefully he resurrects his career a little bit here. But Gunnar, did you have any extra thoughts? We've talked about Sanchez before and what it might mean, but any thoughts on
Mhm.
now that it's official?
It's weird. It's weird to think about how one little mistake might have cost him $4 million. I told you that in text, where you're just lifting and then re-aggravates it. And like you said, I think it's going to be like incentive based. Well, it is obviously, but more along the lines of stuff that he can like just by being healthy, he's going to reach it. Not so much like production wise. Um, I think this deal is a win-win kind of for both teams or both parties here. Brewers, obviously, we get him. We get to keep him, as you mentioned. The other options weren't good. So, in having it be that it's cheaper if it doesn't work out and he literally is hurt, that's a positive for us. And then Gary, of course, he's going to get a chance to get that money back by just being healthy, which you can't really control that, obviously, all the times. He was just lifting and that happens, so you don't know what can happen. But part of it, too, is I don't think it's that serious in my mind, and this is me kind of overthinking a little bit and making my own assumptions here. But if it was that serious, I feel like we probably would have gone a different direction. We talked about trading for somebody maybe, and we had two options there that we could have picked out of Hase and Nola if we wanted. Not it's a big drop off there, but I think if it was super, super serious, we might have just vetoed the deal in itself. Although $3 million, it's worth the risk anyways. But I would take that chance, but I just don't think it was that serious. But again, that's probably me just being hopeful. Nola, he's a selfish guy, let's be honest. He just came here to steal our magic catching powers. He's going to be the best framer in the league now because he was here for a couple weeks, and that's all he just wanted. And he was just going to go somewhere else and take our powers. Um, but no, I mean, he's going to get a chance, like you said, to play in a major league roster and not have to worry about not making a team. So, good for him. And like you said, it just makes us look better too. Um, this feels not unique to baseball, but it is a little bit, and it's unique just because the Brewers do, like you said, a lot. But you just don't see that a lot in other sports of just like you're being able to just like, oh, you can kind of sit on my team for a little bit, and then you can, well, if you get another opportunity, we'll send you away because we just signed them a couple months ago. This wouldn't happen in the NBA. You wouldn't be able to do that necessarily. Um, so it's weird. I guess you could release somebody if you wanted to, but it's just weird how you can kind of team that fast. But those are my two reactions to them. Obviously, like we said, we broke down Gary Sanchez a lot. We enjoy him. Hopefully, he brings that power punch that we've been talking about, him being healthy and he can provide that power strictly versus left-handers. I think that's going to be huge for us. So, yeah, I'm excited about it.
Yeah, I think, I guess for MLB, it's a little different just because of the minor leagues. Like in the NBA, I guess you do have some vets playing in the G League right now, like Kenneth Fareed and guys like that. I just saw were
Yeah.
playing in the G League, which I couldn't believe. But the fact that you can have guys in the minor leagues makes it a little bit different. The Brewers have definitely been a team that says, I'm trying to think of some other examples. I can think of times it happened, but not names right now. But where they let guys go in the middle of a minor league season. It's not an opt out, but the Brewers let them go because another team that might give them a better chance at the majors is kind of looking into them and saying, "Hey, can we come out and just sign him to a minor league deal and then give him a better opportunity?" Tyler Naquin, it happened last year actually
That's who I was thinking of. Yeah.
with Tyler Naquin. He got he got cut in the middle of the season just because the White Sox were hoping to pick him up and put him on their roster. And I think he actually might have made it up for a few games with the White Sox, which he was not going to for the Brewers. There was no
Hmm.
chance. So the Brewers do it. It's nice to see when it happens. And I think as long as they don't have big plans for a player, they try and do as well as they can for that player. But yeah, we can move on now to some of the news and notes that we've gotten from spring training. Last time we talked about the Brewers, I wouldn't say I ranted. I complained a little bit about the lack of coverage that the Brewers were getting down there. At the time, it was just Todd Rosiak. I will say it was only the first week of spring, so there wasn't exactly that much going on, but it still felt like it was lacking compared to other teams. The Brewers have gotten a lot more people down there. They've got like Dom Contronio now. Uh, there's a bunch of people down there, but Brewer Fanatic has Matthew Trueblood down there. He's doing really good work. We got a lot of kind of exclusive information from some of his notes and stuff that he's been putting on Brewer Fanatic, which has been great to see. But I think we could start off with some of the pitching news we've got, Gunnar. So we'll kick it right off with one of the players in the return for Corbin Burns, and that's DL Hall. He got, the first tweet I saw was from Matthew Trueblood, actually, on him striking out Yelich and Rhys Hoskins. And I think Dom Contronio also threw that out there with some video from both of them. But then David Adler of MLB.com wrote a full article on it, kind of talking about how he looked, the reactions from some of the hitters against him, including Yelich and Hoskins. So he started off kind of talking. He got a quote from the new manager, Pat Murphy. He said before he had even thrown a live at bat, he said Hall's got a chance to be a number one starter. He's got overpowering stuff, and the kid is electric. So, like a half hour after he says that, he goes out and strikes out the side against Christian Arroyo, Yelich, and Rhys Hoskins. And sounds like he was sitting like 95 to 97 with the fastball, nasty slider, really good changeup. The fastball, like we talked about the first episode after he got traded when we were talking about the Burns trade in general, it's an 80 grade pitch. Most people think an 80 grade fastball is usually going to be like 100 miles per hour. His is more mid 90s. We know that. It can get up there. We've seen him up to 99 in the majors, but he gets tremendous extension, which adds a couple miles per hour to what the hitter's seeing. He's throwing it at this extremely flat vertical approach angle, which makes it extremely hard for a hitter to square it up and get on top of the ball. And then he throws this nasty slider, a really good changeup, and he throws this curveball too. And right now, the curveball might be lagging a little bit, but honestly, like we talked about at that time, Baseball America's got 60 or higher on every one of those pitches. And he went out, and it sounds like it was just fastball slider for Yelich, which isn't surprising. That's kind of how he's attacked lefties in the majors. But Yelich said he's got good stuff, good slider, good heater, a lot of life to it. He said the fastball was the best pitch he had seen so far from a Brewers pitcher in live ABs. And it's just, you can see a future where DL Hall is the Brewers' best pitcher. And I know some people still aren't thrilled with the return in the Burns trade. And we're going to touch on the other player that came into it as well, because he's having a pretty interesting start to spring as well. But you see a guy who has the arsenal to get righties and lefties out from the left side. It's just not that common. It really is not. And especially as a starter. There are relievers, and somehow the Brewers have turned Hobie Milner into a guy who does that. But usually there's going to be some platoon issues and some concerns. The changeup really throws a wrench into the type of concerns you would have for that. Like, it's a great pitch for righties, and that's what he got Hoskins on. He threw him a 88 mile per hour changeup, kind of got him off balance with that, and then blew 95 past him, basically tunneled it from what people are saying that were there. So, and I guess walking back to the dugout, Hoskins yelled out to Hall, more of that. So he said the fastball jumps on you, like everyone said. He's super athletic. He's moving fast, but he's not actually very big. But I think there's something to be said for guys who aren't that big, like Freddie as well. It makes it a little bit easier to get that flat vertical approach. He spins it really well. And it's just a totally different perceived velocity versus what he's throwing. And what he's throwing is already high velo. So I'm excited about him. I've been excited since the trade. I'm probably higher on him now than I was even at the time, and I was talking pretty highly of him at that point. So I've just been really excited to see it. I'm really hoping he's in at least one of the TV games so we can see him on the mound in spring a little bit. But either way, there's going to be reports. There's going to be people talking about him we'll learn a decent amount about him. But at the time, I think there was question if he was going to make the rotation. I, I I would be more surprised if he doesn't make the rotation than if he does at this point. I think the only way it doesn't happen is if they don't think he's stretched out enough at the time spring ends. So, Gunnar, what do you obviously pitching's a little bit more of my thing. We know that, but when you hear kind of some of the quotes from the hitter's perspective, what does that make you think? How difficult of an at bat would that be when somebody's able to mix four pitches in with all these different velocity bands, all this different stuff going on? They're all kind of outlier pitches in some regard. Like, what are you thinking if you have to step into a box against somebody like that?
I feel bad for Yelich being a lefty. That's got to be. I had no chances already. These Hoskins had no chances already, but Yelich being a lefty, that just has to be devastating. And I with you about. I never know how to feel with these things because he's dominating our hitters, our best hitters, and you're like, oh, that's good for him, and we want to see that. And then there was another video of Reese Hoskins. I think it might have been even the first day of spring or the first couple of days he took Freddie deep, and I sent it to you just like, look at Hoskins, and I'm like, wait, that's our best pitcher. I don't, I don't know, but I think us being players too on a much lower level, obviously, we're not saying we're as good as these people, but
Better.
we kind of understand, we understand spring training and like spring and winter and kind of coming off of a season, and how it feels. And I think even though I was a hitter or I tried to be a hitter, I can understand pitchers having more of a turnover and how hard it is for going from a season to season, trying to ramp up like you're talking about for him to be a starter. So him looking this ready already, I think is very positive. He said like the velo was up too and everything too. So I, along with that thinking, I'm not going to have a concern with him as a relief pitcher, which that's the floor for him. And there's a lot of similarities. Obviously, left-handed pitcher. That's probably why I'm making the similarity. But Josh Hader, like he never really got the chance to start. We didn't really try to make him a starter or forced it on him really. But worst case scenario, I think that's kind of what we're looking at here with the type of stuff he has. Um, and that's exciting. Just and you mentioned he might be our best pitcher. Even if he's doing that, that's period. He could be our best pitcher just by talent. What and my question, I guess, to you was going to be, what would you need to see outside of being stretched out? Because spring's hard to stretch out. Like we're not going to see him pitch. Maybe we'll see him pitch 6 innings. I doubt it. Like he's going to be in a weird spot to be like, what do you need to see to have him be a starter and be ready for that? I mean, they're going to know their plan and everything, obviously, but let's say he doesn't perform too. Is that going to be a red flag for you?
Performance is so hard in spring.
Yeah.
It's just pitchers can go out one day and say, or they might be told to do this, that they're going to throw only fastball changeup today because that's what they're working on. And that's why it's hard to judge hitters too, to be clear. Pitchers are always working on stuff in spring. So hitters having really good springs doesn't necessarily mean they're going to have a really good season. It might just mean they were facing a bunch of guys who were just working on stuff and didn't really care about how the results went. I think if we see him getting stretched out to 4+ innings, which is usually, you might see 5 towards the end of a spring
Yeah.
from some guys. That's usually what you're looking at. If he gets there, I would expect him to be in the rotation. If they do spend the whole spring stretching him out, I would expect him to be in there. I think what you need to see is, one, is the velocity holding up as he stretches out a little bit more as he gets into that fourth or fifth inning? Is the command able to hold up enough over the course of that type of like a longer outing as well? I think for me, the command's probably the one concern still, just because we don't know. The Brewers have done well with improving command of guys over the years. It's been overlooked, I think. Corbin got a lot better at it as he went, and suddenly in his Cy Young year, it was unbelievable. That was, I think, the outlier year, but he's had pretty good command ever since his blow up 2019. Woodruff he's gotten much, much better with his command. Freddie Peralta has gotten much, much, much better with his command over the years. We were starting to see it with Aaron Ashby, who walked a decent amount in the minors and was starting to get better in the majors before his injury. Like they do well with that. And I'm not just talking walks. I mean, obviously it's about where you can spot pitches in the zone. But when you have stuff as good as Hall, and like a lot of the Brewers that I just talked about, when the stuff is that good, there's more room for error. So I don't worry that much about how well he can command in the zone. He just needs to be in and around the zone as often as possible, using all 4 pitches. And then I think he's got a little room for error on. Obviously, you can't just be throwing stuff thigh high down the middle all the time, but you have more room to make a mistake with the type of stuff he has, which gives me a lot of hope that over the course of a game, you might make 3, 4 mistakes, but there's a decent chance you're going to get them back instead of seeing them going over the fence like other less talented pitchers might. Um, we talked about the Woodruff, kind of the Woodruff effect on the clubhouse. This is not a recent signing or anything, but I do think like Wade Miley, for a guy like Hall, especially, one seems like a good personality fit based on what we know of Hall. Kind of both Southern guys who are just, they seem like Miley's more outgoing than what Hall has shown so far, but I have a feeling they probably get along pretty well. Learning from a guy like that who doesn't have the type of stuff you have, and then also learning from a guy like Woodruff who kind of does have the type of stuff you have, that's kind of the best of both worlds from a veteran perspective. And if he can take what they're teaching and what they're telling him and put it into practice even decently, he could be the number 2 this year, and it wouldn't shock me if that ended up being the case. So I'm probably getting a little too high on spring training, early spring training stuff here, and it's hard not to, but I think that's at least a possibility. And I don't know that even at the time of the trade, I would have been thinking that right away. But the more I kind of see of him and hear of him, and honestly, the interviews sold me on him a lot too, because I do think he's got a really good head on his shoulders, and that matters a lot too. I could see it being a pretty quick breakout for him with the Brewers all of a sudden that trade looking quite a bit better than some of the national pundits thought, just because Hall is performing earlier. And like I said, we're going to talk about the other piece of that trade too in a little bit. But quickly, I do want to talk about a couple other pitchers. So Thiago Vieira, he's out of options, first of all. So he's either making the team or getting DFA'd, or I guess potentially traded or something during spring training. He has such good stuff. And I talked about him a little bit, I think on our last one or maybe 2 ago. I don't remember which one, but he's got really good stuff. We've seen him up to triple digits in when he was overseas. I think he was more like 97 to 99, maybe 95 to 99, touching 99 in AAA. But he had a fastball and a slider last year, and he came into spring this year throwing a splitter, a new pitch for him, something that is kind of surprising he didn't pick up overseas, because that's where they love splitters in the Asian leagues. Like, they love them. And he was working with Tread, who's, most people know the name Driveline. Most people might not know the name Tread, but it's a very similar setup. It's basically Driveline, but it's just their own brand of it. And they do things a little bit differently, obviously, but they do a lot of cool video work, and they kind of show like the Rapsodo data and stuff that they're getting from these pitches. And they showed Vieira working on the splitter, and they didn't even know he was throwing it. He just told them, "Hey, I'm working on this new pitch. I'm gonna throw it now." And the guy just was like, "Oh, that's a really good pitch." And then as the video goes on, you can see it going from like 9 or 84 miles per hour up to almost 90, and it looked nasty. And I don't think the command of it is perfect or anything right now, but it looks like it could be a pretty elite pitch if he can figure it out completely. And if you're throwing upper 90s with a really good splitter and a pretty good slider, I think they got to find a way to keep him on this team. And we can talk about how that became easier in a second too, but I'm really hoping they find a way to keep him here. I think I was hoping that before I learned about the splitter, just because I think he does have good stuff. He seems super competitive. He seems like a really like happy person too. I remember him jumping off the mound after his 1 inning last year. But yeah, he's turning some heads, it sounds like, and that new pitch could be a pretty big deal for him. So in terms of his chances of making the roster, like I just touched on, we did also get some news on J.B. Bukauskas, who was another guy I had specifically brought up as someone I was really hoping they'd be able to keep on the roster. He was actually granted a 4th minor league option, which is huge. It allows him to go be sent to AAA without having to pass him through the waivers or DFA him or anything like that. Honestly, it really cleans up the bullpen situation moving forward here, because as I was looking ahead at the roster, it felt like him and Vieira were fighting for 0 spots at the moment. Kind of fighting with, honestly, Aaron Ashby, depending on how he's going to come back. And that was it was like 3 people fighting for 1 spot, really. Now it feels like it's just kind of between Ashby and Vieira to see who makes the roster. And I mean, Bukauskas came out and he struck out the side against the Angels, looked really good. I think he got a pretty healthy, it was a pretty bad miss from the umpire for his 3rd strikeout. Really, really good receiving job from Contreras, but it was not a strike. It was way, way below the zone. But this stuff looked really good. His slider looked nasty. He got some really, really bad swings out of their hitters. Fastball, we don't have velo on any of these games or anything right now, but sinker was moving pretty well. And I think he even mixed in a couple changeups that looked pretty decent. So I think he's going to be an important part of this bullpen at some point this year. I honestly do. I think he's going to have an impact on this team at some point. But getting that fourth option just made things so much easier for the Brewers moving forward. And it was the first time I can remember them getting that since I know Adrian Hauser got it in 2019. And that was actually pretty big too, because he didn't make the opening day roster that year. He probably would have either been forced to, or he may have been DFA'd. He didn't have a great 2018. He hadn't shown that much up until that point, but I was pretty excited he got that fourth option. 2019, he had a really, really good season. He helped the Brewers a lot. First out of the pen, and then he started starting down the stretch and actually gave me hope that he was going to be better than he ended up being. But I mean, Bukauskas was a first round pick at some point. I'm almost certain he was traded as part of the Zach Greinke trade with the Diamondbacks and Astros. And the stuff is there. And the Brewers do really well with this type of profile, with the sinker slider, especially adding in a changeup. They do really, really well with this type of pitcher, and I think he's going to be helpful at some point. We actually had a question about I think we had a question about most surprising or a dark horse candidate to make the opening day roster. We'll talk about that in a little bit, but I do have I have a bit of a hot take that I don't think Elvis Peguero is going to make the major league roster to start the season. And that's just because he has options, and there are a number of people who don't, who are all in a similar vein in terms of talent and ability to Peguero. So if Bukauskas had been out of options like we thought he was going to be, he probably would have been somebody that I would have considered over Peguero. But now it's going to be more in that Vieira realm. But yeah, Gunnar, before we move to position players here, do you have anything on these pitchers? And like I said, this is more my thing. I'm gonna let you talk
Yeah,
more here.
with all the more of this roster construction wise, I can talk about because that's stuff I understand, but more with like, why can't I just thought of his name. Who's the white guy? Varland last
Gus
year.
Farland,
Yeah, like it sort of has that vibe with this more with Thygo or however you pronounce his name.
Giago.
Yeah, I was gonna say I read it and you said it completely different how I would even say it, so I would not remember that. But um, I do remember him last year, obviously, and I people won't believe me, but I wanted you to talk about him today because I saw all the hype, and I just wanted to listen to you talk about it because I wanted to learn more about him. But um, it gives me that vibe with Varland because it's like a guy with a lot of talent that you want to keep in your roster, like your system, because you want to really like curate him and kind of polish him your way. But if he doesn't have options and stuff, you're kind of stuck because you know that somebody else is going to want him. Obviously, that's a little different because he goes right back to the team he came from. But with this, we have so many guys, like you mentioned, without options. It becomes a game like that versus a game of who has the most talent, who do we like the most. It's just who can we keep in the organization, who it's just that you're playing like puzzle pieces, basically trying to figure out how do we keep the most guys in our organization that we can at least give chances to and see who works. Um, but I would want to see both of those guys. It's just going to be a matter of that, and hopefully we will go over this at some point. When I was thinking of maybe we can go over like who we think will make the roster, but that's going to
Yeah.
be way towards the end of spring, and obviously we can predict that stuff. But yeah, I guess I'm excited to kind of see how that all plays out.
Yeah. And Vieira is 31. He at one point he was a big prospect with the Mariners. I think he played in the Futures game, and he was chucking like 102 in that and got a ton of attention for it. He was always a reliever, like he was never going to be a starter from what I remember. But I knew about him as a prospect. This was probably 10 years ago at this point. And
1982, what year is that if he's 31? If
what year was he born?
yeah, I was joking. I was calling him old.
93. We're he's only like 5 years
I
younger than
know,
us,
I know.
or older than us. Um, he, yeah, he's just going to be one. I'm super interested in what they do with him. It wouldn't shock me if they work out a trade with somebody else just to try and sneak him onto the roster. Maybe
Hmm.
he's the one who gets traded. I just feel like he's going to be a really hard guy to just give up and let go for nothing. So I would imagine they're going to at least do something to try and get some sort of value for him or for somebody else to keep him on the roster. But moving on to the position players here, we talked about Sal Frelick playing some infield last time we were talking about him, but we did get a question from JJ Phillips asking, is Sal truly viable at third base? Or is this more of just a fun spring training experiment? If he is viable, how does that shape the opening day infield? So we got some questions about the opening day roster. Like you said, I think we're probably going to touch on it more in the future just because there's still so much up in the air as we go through the rest of
Hmm.
spring here. But if Sal, let's start with the first question. Do you think it's a legitimate possibility that Sal is playing third base consistently, we'll say?
Consistently, no. And I think we predicted that anyways. I think even if it worked out, my answer is probably still going to be no. Even if you flashed the glove over there and we were like, holy crap, this guy can play. I think he fits more in the outfield. And this is more of a situation where if we have, I mentioned this last episode, but if we have a lot of guys who are sticking and they're all hitting, and you're just trying to find a way to get everybody in the lineup, if he can, like I said, be at zero is kind of what I call it, but just average on defense, don't just league average on defense. Just don't make that many mistakes. That's going to be a positive for us if he's sticking and Garrett's sticking and Weimer's sticking and Jackson's sticking. Everybody's hitting. Um, just finding ways to get everybody in the lineup is that's going to be huge for us. But I think it's an experiment. If that's and that's not really a knock or anything. I just think we're trying to see what it is more than like, oh, this he's our third baseman to start the year. But what do you think about it?
Yeah, it sounds like, I mean, we got the couple videos of him mostly just making barehanded plays was all we've gotten from him for some reason. But, or I shouldn't say barehanded, but just running in on the ball. I did see that he turned a pretty nice 5-4-3 double play in the game the other day. Sounds like every play he's had a chance to make, he has made so far. Like we talked about on the last one, I just think he is a very, very good athlete. And so he's probably going to be able to make it work especially at second, in my opinion. But it sounds like third is possible. And I just think, like you said, it's not going to be a consistent playing time. I think the ability to possibly move, just moving guys around during a game, there's going to be limited bench spots. So the ability to keep a guy like Frelick in the game while also maybe say I don't know who's starting at. There's a lot of speed on the team, so I'm trying to come up with like a pinch running situation that makes sense, but there's
Yeah.
not one that's gonna probably happen much. But say you hit Weimer for Bryce Terang because a lefty came in a big spot, something like that. So now Weimer goes to the outfield and Frelick, who is in right, can come in and play second base. Like it creates that type of flexibility that you didn't have before, where you only have to use one bench player instead of possibly having to make
Good
two
point. Yeah.
subs and already having a short bench. That's just tough to do. I think that's the main goal here is just to give them that type of flexibility for that type of move. If he's fantastic in the infield and like you said, all the other guys are hitting, then maybe he can stick there. But I think you're more likely to use him in this like substitute just to be able to maneuver the roster around a little bit in game. And like you said, all it does need to be is average. Even honestly, it just needs to be close to average. It doesn't even need to be average. He just needs to hold his own. I don't think you're getting, if Tyler Black's in the infield instead of Sal Frelick, I don't think you're going to be getting any better defense from Black versus Frelick. Like, I think if as long as he hits, it doesn't matter as much how the defense plays, as long as he's just not a complete butcher. As long as he's not 2007 Ryan Braun at third base, he should be fine. But yeah, let's say he does. How about we say second? Let's say he sticks at second so well that they're like, yeah, we would rather have him there than Terang, Mitchell and Weimer. That's our platoon in right. We got Yelich in left, Churio in center. We're gonna put Frelick at second base. I think personally, I mean, Willie's the shortstop. There's no doubt about that. Hoskins is your regular first baseman. I think you're going to see Bowers there. I think Bowers is going to make the roster. We'll see how that goes later on in the season, but I think he'll be there. And then I think Ortiz is probably your third baseman in that spot. And we'll get into him in a second here, like I've talked about a few times. But I think in that situation, Terang might be in AAA. And the main reason being, I think Monasterio might make the roster over him as the backup. I think in that situation, you're probably wanting Terang to get every day at bats in AAA because you're trying to figure out the bat. And I don't have much hope in that happening, but I also think early in the season, at least, it would make more sense for him to play every day than to be the defensive replacement. Now, as you get into the stretch run or whatever, then it might make sense for Terang to be up instead of a guy like Monasterio just to be late game defense. And we talked about it before. As much as we don't love Terang, a Terang Willie Joey Ortiz, second through third defensively, is there's not many ground balls sneaking through that infield. They're going to be picking it. And they all have pretty good arms and they're all just really athletic. So I I still think it's just more of a substitute pattern thing that they're trying to give themselves an opportunity to use it. But Gunnar, do you have anything that would differ, I guess, if he does somehow make it work and he is an everyday infielder this year? Would it be any different than what I was just laying out there?
It's just what you said basically is the positive of that. It makes it easy. And you laying it out like you did with, let's say you put Weimer out there. I was kind of thinking of the outfield. Our defense gets better, actually.
Yeah,
Like we gain some defense, even though it seems like you're getting worse because you're putting Frelick in at second. So if you took him out for Terang, I guess that's the minus there. But you mentioned everybody else. He might be the worst defender. And if he can be a zero in second base, where defense did not take a step back. Well, I guess Yelich. I completely forgot about Yelich in left field. But we could put Garrett in for left, I guess, if you wanted to, if you make it a defensive thing. But or Yelich is wherever DH. But somebody's got to play left, I guess, and Yelich can stick out there. I don't care. But I guess it just makes everything easy, is my point. So I just can't imagine it, which is hard for me to kind of think about too. I guess that's my hardest part. Is just I don't see him playing there every day. We're gonna talk about the next guy. Um, who we got next? We're gonna be talking about, I think, because and you mentioned the dark horse comment. I think that's my dark horse to make the team is the next guy we'll be talking about, who also plays second base potentially and third base. But um, all of that combined, you mentioned Monasterio. That's just why we have so many options. It's just going to be fun to see how it plays out, honestly. And thinking about that even more, I think it's because there's so many cards to be played. It's just like we can literally have anything happen and we can make it work, which is kind of cool. Like whatever we end up coming with, we have the roster to make it work, which is makes it fun too. And like I said, makes it easy, I guess is the best way to wrap it up.
yeah. I think I think that pretty much covers it. But we can talk about the guy that you were just hinting at, and somebody that I think we've touched on a few times, probably more than people would think, because for a while now we've kind of both viewed him as a guy that I could see things breaking the right way and see him making this team. But that's Oliver Dunn, and Brewers traded for him shortly before the Rule 5 protection date from the Phillies for Hendry Mendez and Robert Moore, and we talked about that trade at the time. I think even at the time, I showed that I was pretty high on him. I think he's a borderline top 20 guy in the system for the Brewers. And when you're 26 years old, that is harder to be that high up in rankings just because kind of some of that prospect, like everything about a prospect is usually seen as like, oh, he's 22, 23, 24. If he's not in the majors by then he's probably not going to work out. And Matthew Trueblood, who I mentioned earlier, he had a really good article on Brewer Fanatic talking about how the Brewers see a lot of value in that sort of post-hype type player. And we've seen it over the years. I think you can talk about, honestly, Tyrone Taylor was well past his prospect hype when he finally made it to the majors and then turned into a really solid, productive backup outfielder. And Jace Peterson was a big-time prospect at one point, had completely fallen off, was getting minor league deals, did pretty well for the Brewers, turned himself into a 2-year deal for like 10 million or whatever it was from the A's. The Brewers value that type of player and see to them it's like, well, who cares if he's past like the huge hype? If he's still got talent, like we can try and get the best out of him. And you could use Bryce Wilson as an example on the pitching side. He was a huge prospect at one point who had been given up on by the Pirates of all teams. Like there's plenty of examples. They try and do this a lot, but Dunn is obviously not a guy who made the major leagues or a guy who he was in Double-A at 26 years old. And Murphy had a pretty good quote here. He just talking about Dunn. He just said, I love the guy. His dial is up pretty high right now. He's competing. I love his intensity. I love his focus. I love his preparation. I love his swing. He got 2 tough balls yesterday and he was credited with errors on both, but I think a lot of guys would have struggled with those balls. I've liked everything about this kid. He rises to the occasion. He's not afraid. He's prepared. So along with everything we've talked about Gunnar, and we talked about his swing when we first made the trade and how there's a lot to like there. And there was some video of BP the other day, just some guys hitting homers. And the first swing, I was like, who is that? That's a great looking swing. And I was like, I think that's Oliver Dunn. And then you text me like 2 minutes after I watch it and go, yes, Oliver Dunn video. And I was like, oh, yep, it was. My swing guy confirmed it. But yeah, I'll let you take over on this one because maybe you're a dark horse to make the roster.
And that would be my answer too. So when that question comes up, I'll be repeating my exact answer. But you mentioned post hype. He's post hype for sure, but he's also in a situation where he was blocked. So it's like he didn't do anything wrong necessarily. He was just dealt bad cards, I guess is the best way to put it. I've been making a lot of cards references, I guess today. But he was blocked too. So it's like and there wasn't a red flag necessarily. And I think the Brewers double like that. Because he had the hype. Plus, it was like this guy just needs an opportunity, and we'll give it to him. And it's gonna depend on how the roster plays out, as we just talked about. And but I feel pretty confident he'll make it. And with this quote that you talked about, if Murphy's liking him a lot and his swing, obviously, I liked it. We talked a bunch about it. The power potential at second base, we going from Bryce Terang to that is astronomical for this team. If that even just getting rid of righty versus lefty, all that extra stuff, him just being in place of that offensively, the production. Um, Thinking about that too, we had horrible production at second base and probably right field. One of those were the worst two spots in the league at both of those spots.
Right field
Uh,
was by a lot. I don't know about second. Second's just not a good offensive
yeah.
position, so that might have saved them, but it wasn't good.
Yeah, and we think we're going to improve both of those by a good amount this year. So, um, that and I'm just excited about him in general. I mentioned the power. What I didn't know though was I knew about it, but they had a video. I think he hit a triple one of these games, and seeing his speed and how good of an athlete it is, and obviously Murphy mentioned that. Um, that's that to me sealed it, and that's why it was going to be my pick for the dark horse today because if he can bring that to the table, I like the defensive potential at second base. We mentioned Sal Frelick at second base being a good athlete. It gives you a good chance over there being just kind of giving yourself range. Um, so I would bank on him being good. Um, I hope the bat plays, but now if he's got some defensive floor to him too, I think that's even more of a plus for him as well. So that got me even more excited. So, yeah, I think he'll make the roster. It's going to depend on how everything else breaks out. We're going to mention the other guy who I think will be, and you mentioned them already, at third base. That's kind of how I see it now: is him at second, Oliver Dunn, and then the guy we'll mention later at third base, or next we'll talk about. But um, that makes a lot of sense to me right now, and that's kind of what I'm thinking here when we haven't even touched March because we're in a leap year, I guess, right now. So, but that's my thought as of right now, and I'm excited to see him.
Yeah, I think I'm not as confident that he'll make it as you are, I think, but I do think there's a very real chance that he's going to make the roster. And I should note that Baseball America pointed this out, which I didn't realize at the time, but he had an average exit velocity of 92 miles per hour last year, which would have put him only behind Wes Clark for all of Brewers minor league hitters last year. So, I mean, he's 5'10, he's 185. It's not somebody that you expect a bunch of power out of, but there's real pop in that bat. It's not just he hit a decent amount of homers, but honestly, in my mind, it was kind of similar to like a Tyler Black situation where it's like, yeah, he's got power, but it might be more minor league power and then it turns into doubles at the major league level.
Hmm.
A 92 mile per hour average exit velocity with pretty good loft to a swing and the ability to hit the ball in the air. I could see it being real power at the major league level. And there's strikeout concerns, yes. And like you touched on, I think the run is really like the speed is really overlooked and it has been. I think most prospect like groups or whatever you want to call them, prospecting sites have given him like 55 speed on the scale, but when you look at him, you just don't really think he's going to be fast. So I think a lot of people
Yeah.
just haven't even noticed it. He is a quick dude. I think his arm is better than what people have listed for most of his scouting traits, but the glove's not great. I think he can handle second base at the major league level and he'll be fine. I think he'll have decent range. I just don't love like his actions at second base when I've watched them so far, but Murph is right in that both the errors he made in that game, one of them when he was at third, took a huge hop up and hit him like in the middle of the chest. Like it was a roller and then it all of a sudden just flew up. And that happens in Arizona a lot more than it does on a major league field. And then the one at second just took a last second kind of skip to the left past his glove. Both times he kind of knocked him down, but it was just he didn't have time to make a play afterwards. I think it's going to be probably below average on the defensive side, but I do think the bat could be a well above average hitter for a second baseman because, like I said, it's not a good offensive position. And in some ways, it's not a perfect comp here, but he kind of reminds me of like Dan Ugla in that kind of going to be more of a power hitting second baseman with, I think
That
he's
was
fine.
bad defense, right?
Yep, that was not good defense. Um, and I think Ugla was more jacked than pretty much anybody. The only comp for the type of strength that Ugla had at second was the current Brewers bench coach, and that's Ricky Weeks. Like
Yep.
those two looked like they did some offseason. They weren't they didn't look natural. But they were both huge. I mean, you could almost make the Weeks comp in some ways too. Weeks had more potential, and by the time he was 26, Weeks was in like his sixth season in the majors. So it's not the exact same thing, but Dunn is super interesting, and I wouldn't be shocked if he makes the roster. And it'll just depend, honestly, if they want offense or defense at that second base spot, which they
Yep.
value more. But as you noted, and I have touched on like 30 times during this podcast, Joey Ortiz is off to a pretty fun start for spring training today. He went deep. The video we got from, obviously, like I've touched on a few times, we're not getting much actual TV time in spring. Of course, we got two games, not much happens, and then the first game we don't. Ortiz hits a bomb, Wilkin has a big game. A lot of fun stuff happens, and we don't get to see any of it, but we did get some kind of like third base dugout camera view of the Ortiz homer. And Gunnar, you got to tell the people what you texted me right away when you saw it.
They know if they saw the Twitter video. I did end up posting that, but from the side views, either front facing him face to face or from the back, like you said, we saw so much Ryan Braun there. I see with this the movements, um, the way he goes into his swing, his load and everything. What I noticed though from front facing and from the back too is it gives me a little bit of Arcia-ish vibes of like balance purposes. I think I could see him having a little bit of trouble with that, but it hasn't been a trouble up to this point. He hits the ball hard. He's a good contact guy, right? He doesn't strike out at all really much.
Yeah, it's a
Um,
low strikeout rate. He
yeah,
chases a decent amount, but he gets
yeah.
the bat to the ball really well. So
Which is funny. I think that's Braun actually. I think Braun chased a lot.
he did.
Um,
Oh yeah.
But yeah, I noticed that. I think maybe some balance issues potentially, but I love all the movements that he makes. He gets into that path I talk about a lot super easily. And the bat speed is what I noticed on that swing in particular was just like, holy crap, that this guy can tap into some power. At the very least, hit the ball hard. But if he's hitting in the air with power, that's a huge plus. And we don't even talk about the defense because that's A plus defense. So think about the player you just got. If you have the A plus defense and we're talking and bragging about his swing right now, um, this might shock you. I was going to bring this to the table today, but after everything I've seen and what I was just talking about, Tyler Black's still my favorite prospect, but I really like Joey Ortiz. I think he might be my second right now after seeing these swings, the defense. The only thing I don't like, and I mentioned it last episode, was that he doesn't walk a ton. But I mentioned the contact, the seems like a guy's going to hit for average, at least up there in average, like 280s or something. I don't know. Not that I don't care about batting average at all, but um, just a guy who's going to make contact and just be a different type of hitter than what we've seen on the Brewers and someone that we need, honestly, in that aspect. Just a guy who's going to make contact and not strike out a ton. So I can kind of see him anywhere in the lineup as far as 1 through 9. He can fit anywhere basically if he's got power, he's making contact. Just depends on what you want there. But I'm super excited about him, which was surprising. I knew I was going to be excited about him. But I mean, I explained every reason why, but I'm just shocked that he's impressed me this much already. We mentioned that it's not even March yet, and we talked about Hall, we talked about now Joey Ortiz. I think the Brewers hit a complete home run with this trade, and it hasn't even we haven't really seen Hall in spring. We haven't seen Hall in spring training yet. We've gotten a little taste now of Ortiz. The Brewers killed it with this one, I think.
Yeah. I obviously we went through it at the time, and I think the main point that I was pointing out at that time was that the floor for both these guys is pretty high. Like with Hall, and you talked about it earlier, there's a legit like relief ace type. It's not quite the floor to be a relief ace, obviously, but I think an MLB reliever is pretty much the floor. And the ceiling we talked about today is a legit like top of the rotation type arm. With Ortiz, the floor is somebody who can handle shortstop really, really well, run into a few balls, get on base at a decent enough clip, and hit the ball pretty hard, even if it's not elevated. the ceiling is like a 5 or 6 WAR player because that defense comes with what it comes with. And then he starts elevating the ball and the power comes. I mean, we saw it with Adames in 2021 when he basically got to the 5 WAR season. All you have to do is have an OPS near 800 if you're playing that good a defense. And that's the type of season you're putting up. And I think I made a Dansby Swanson comp at one point during the trade episode that we talked about.
Yeah, he did.
And I actually heard somebody else make that not too long ago and said that that is the type of player he could be if he starts getting the ball in the air a little bit more. And Swanson took a couple years in the majors to start doing that. If you remember, he wasn't viewed as a very good offensive player after a couple years. We might
Hmm.
have to credit his breakout to the Brewers giving up like 4 homers in that one series against them because he just never stopped hitting after that. But he he reminds me of him, and I just think there's even it's not the same type of athlete because JJ Hardy wasn't that good an athlete, but I see some JJ Hardy type abilities there too, where Hardy was a fantastic defender who had some pop, who was a really smart base runner. Hardy wasn't as fast as Ortiz is, but I see some comps in that way too. And like Prime, funny enough, Prime Hardy on the Orioles was a fantastic player. And he had a really good season with the Brewers as well. Obviously, it was a little up and down, and he ended up getting traded for Gomez. And we've talked about all that on the podcast before too. But I just think there's so much there. And I won't go as far as saying like this trade is perfect because we just don't know. They might both hit the floor. Like they might be
Hmm.
more closer to the floor than the ceiling. But the safe floor made me feel really good about the trade. And the more we see of them, I just feel like there's a better chance of them hitting the ceiling than I may have even initially thought when I already was excited about it. So, um, yeah, getting you bought in this quickly is not usually the case. So it
And
makes
we
me
got that
happy.
pick still that we're going to pick in the next year's draft that we don't know who it is
Yeah.
yet. So on top of that, we love these guys. I think just those two guys to me is worth the trade.
Yeah.
And now we get our own pick at somebody. So yeah, I can't see how we could have done much better, honestly, right now.
Yeah. I agree. We can let's quickly touch on we talked about the BP or the home run kind of compilation that they threw out there of BP the other day. But the Brewers have been putting out some pretty good social media posts, especially early on before some of the reporters got there. I think they were doing their best to kind of supplement fans wanting information and wanting something to get excited about. But they're doing a good job getting video of like the Ortiz homer and trying to get us stuff even if there's no broadcast. But I think the two main videos that we got to talk about both involve our new manager, and that is Pat Murphy's speech that he gave to the team. I think it was just a pretty practice speech early on in spring, but it was pretty hard to not get excited about him in that moment. We talked about when the hire was made that, yes, I still have some of the concerns about how he's going to specifically manage if he's going to get a little too old school for my liking. But in terms of managing a clubhouse and having the attention of his players and the respect of his players, I have no concerns about that. And that speech that he gave when he talked about, I want to win games until they tap me on the shoulder and say, there's no more games to win. Like, that's the type of mindset every team should have in every baseball, every sport, really. Like, you just keep winning and doing your job, and all of a sudden, you get to where you want to be. And he put it in a way that was just super easy to understand and super easy to. If I were in that locker room, I would have been pumped up to go out there and practice for him at that point. Um, and then he made the point like, hey, I don't want it to be like, hey, the old guy got a chance to manage and that's good enough. Like, no, he wants to go out and do it and win. And he wants to prove that he deserved this chance. It wasn't just handed to him because of all of his experience and all the years he spent toiling in the minors. And I want to, Brian Snitker spent a really, really long time in minor league baseball without getting a real chance at the majors. And obviously, Murph was a bench coach instead of being a minor league coach, but he was a college coach for a really long time. And then he was a minor league coach for a little bit before his interim chance with the Padres. Snitker has been really good at finding the balance of being pretty new school with how he operates as a coach, but also having the ability to be hard on players while also having their respect. And I think that is something that old school coaches are better at than a lot of the newer school coaches who it's not easy. Like those guys just came up in a world where they were maybe allowed to be harder on players than coaches are, or players took that type of coaching better than they do now. It's not easy all the time to get players to buy into that type of coaching, but that speech and just the way everyone was locked in on him in the locker, like you could see it in the clubhouse. The whole team was just completely locked in on every word he was saying. And I don't want to, I do want to rip on Craig Counsell, but I don't in the same vein. Like, I think I, I'm not going to be a revisionist history guy and pretend I didn't love the way he managed baseball games. I did. I thought he was really, really good at it. I thought some of this type of stuff, and players love playing for him. So I'm not even saying that wasn't the case. But when we would see his speeches from when they clinch a division or when they're doing whatever, like he didn't command the room like Murphy was during this speech. And this was a pre-practice speech, not a we just won the NL Central, we just beat the Rockies and we're going to the NLCS. It wasn't that type of speech at all. It was literally just we're going out for a spring training practice. And I mean, he just completely commanded the room and had the attention of everybody. And you could tell they really respect him. And the vibes just seemed really, really high while we were during that speech. So, Gunnar, what did you? I mean, you obviously saw the speech too. Were there any other takeaways you had? Anything you noticed just in anything with the speech?
Hmm. You mentioned the word respect, and that was one that I wrote down. Was that's what I kind of feel like is the combination of respect and fun. I don't know if I was doing stuff, but you mentioned maybe the scooter part of it, where they gave him the scooter. If he didn't, I'll mention it now. But it's just he seems like the perfect mix right now of we're not going to see his game managing style or anything. But along that lines of it, we did mention all the coaches that we have, and I know a guy that you were excited about maybe getting the job was like Walker. What was his
McKinnon.
name? Yeah, and his job title is like run prevention. He's been a guy who's like in the organization for a while. We just have a lot of guys who have been here in the organization for a while, which just really makes me feel confident that we're going to do things similar and maybe different in ways that we needed to be different. And you mentioned those ways, like the respect is what I kind of keep going on, is that's what's going to be the difference is in that locker room video, you mentioned it. You can see all the eyes of the players. Freddie sticks in my mind when he was talking. He was like just dead-eyed focus on him. Like everything this guy's saying is like it means something to me. Um, Guys who I don't even recognize the faces of in the locker room were like this guy, like same thing. Like this guy, he's got all the attention of everybody in the room. Um, and that's just going to go a long way this season. And with the young roster too, with all the coaches that we've got, I think it's hopefully going to be the perfect mix that we have.
Yeah. So I mean, in general, the Murphy vibes just seem high. So I think we're pretty excited to see where this goes throughout the spring, and then obviously just to see how he actually manages the team once we get into the season. Because I think that is still going to be my concern, is if he's going to go some totally different direction. But like you kind of touched on with the assistants, there's a lot of continuity with the staff and with the front office and everything. You would imagine they're not going to allow him to go rogue and do something completely different than what's been happening before. So I think we need to probably get into these listener questions, Gunnar, because we're taking a while here, and we've got a decent amount of questions that we haven't yet answered. So let's start off with Patrick. He was asking, who do you guys see as the biggest competition for the NL Central this year? So Gunnar, any thoughts on that?
I think in my opinion, we're the leaders, and that's non-biasly, I think we're the leaders, but the Cubs will be there in the same fashion, I believe. The Cardinals will be better. They're not going to be non-existent-ish as they were last year. Um, it's just going to be sort of the same vibes, I think, for me, but I feel confident that we're still ahead of everybody else. I'm not really worried about anybody in that sense, but the Cubs will be a little bit better, especially adding Craig, unfortunately, or Greg, whatever his name is. He will make them better, even if that floor for them maybe is sort of close to the same. Him just being there is going to be able to, he's going to get the most out of that roster. So, not scared of them in that sense, but I think they're probably going to end up being our biggest competition. Um, are you scared at all of the Cardinals, I guess? Because you probably have similar thoughts on the Cubs. Are the Cardinals going to shock you?
Um, Honestly, I can see the Cardinals and Reds, either one of them
Or Reds? Yeah.
having a good season wouldn't shock me. I think the Cardinals did a decent job of kind of giving their starting rotation a better floor. I think 2 years ago, the Cardinals played way in over their heads. I think they were much better than they actually, or they played much better than they actually were.
Yeah.
And that was because Arenado and Goldschmidt were both literally some of the biggest MVP candidates in the league at the same time. At their age, that normally doesn't happen, and we saw it a lot more what you would expect from them, where they're good players. Like they're still very good players, but they were playing like at an like I said an MVP level 2 years ago. Unless they get back to that, I don't think they're this juggernaut of a team. But they do have young pieces that are pretty interesting and could always break out. And I mean, they worry me a little bit. I do think the Cubs are the biggest competition right now. If the Reds pitching improves, maybe. They just didn't go out and do that much in terms of adding pitching like I expected them to. The young bats are all very interesting. You could make the argument that, yeah, they might get way better because they're in their second year. You could also make the argument that pitchers have now learned what they are good and not good at, and they might they might see a lot of adjustments on MLB's side of things, and they might just not hit as well as they did for that stretch when they made their big run last year. And I could see them being competitive. I could also see them looking more like the Reds that we've been used to before last year, which is not super competitive. I think we can tie this in with what Noah Eggert asked, and that was, what are the realistic expectations for this year's team, and are the preseason predictions of the Brewers being middle of the central accurate? I guess to answer the second part, we both think that they're not. I'm with you.
Mhm.
I do think the Brewers currently are the team I feel the best about winning the Central, and it was kind of the same last year. I think a lot of even Brewer fans weren't big believers, and I felt pretty confident they were going to win 90 plus games. And I I don't feel that confident this year. I don't think they're a 90-win team without a decent amount of breaks going their way. But I've got them in like that 85 to 88 win category. And for me, that will be enough to win this division. And then you win the division, get in the playoffs, you never know what's going to happen. But that's my realistic expectation. I could see them being a 500-ish team if things don't go super well. I think a lot of things would have to go poorly for them to be where, I mean, I'm not a betting person, but I keep seeing the line of like 76.5 to 78. Like I would have a hard time passing that up in that situation. Like if I were betting it, it just feels like to me they're almost minimally, assuming health and stuff, minimally pretty close to a 500 team. And I would expect closer to 85 to 88 wins. But Gunnar, you got any different opinions on what you're looking at as a realistic expectation?
I could see 90 wins, but the number to me doesn't make much of a difference. Kind of like what you're saying. I just think we're going to win the division, in my opinion, and how we do it, if we do it in 95 wins or 85 wins, I think either of those make it to the playoffs. And at that point, like you mentioned, it's baseball time. It's just
Yep.
whatever happens, happens, and we got as good as a shot as anybody does. Um, and thinking about the season in general, how seasons always play out, we're going to pick up somebody at the trade deadline. Say we need right now. Does it really matter what they say about us right now? Um, no, because we're going to say our starters aren't going to be, or we need a starter. We'll pick him up at the deadline if we're in first place and whatever. Maybe not exactly that example, but I just think whatever we need by that point, we'll have it. And I like this roster already right now, so I think we'll just have as good a shot as anybody, I guess is my point. However, we make it into the playoffs, I believe it'll be division, but that's just kind of what I expect.
Yeah, I'm with you. I am definitely with you on that. I think we got a couple other questions here from Patrick. So we'll start with the most important 10 to 20 game stretch of the season. So I'll answer this one. I think for me, I'll be honest, I didn't look at the schedule to pick out a 10 to 20 game stretch. The most important stretch of the season for me is usually somewhere in October. I know that's a huge cop out, but I don't view MLB seasons like that at all. I don't care who you beat or when you beat them or how you get to your final record. I care about the 162 game record. And I honestly think that's where a lot of the disagreements I have with people on like social media and stuff come from. I just don't think baseball's meant to be consumed in that type of manner. And that's not to say that I don't get how people get upset during stretches like that. Don't 2 years ago when they lost, or I think it was 2 years ago when they lost like nine in a row while Craig was sitting on, he needed like one to break the franchise record and we could not win a game. Like that was super frustrating and it's not fun to watch at that point. But to me, all I care about is what you end up doing at the end. And you could argue, there's plenty of people who believe in the momentum of finishing the regular season really strong and going into the playoffs. And I think there's at times that is the case, but there's been research on it. teams that are hot going into the playoffs actually have often, overall, they've done worse than teams who are not hot going into the playoffs over the long run. And that's why in general, I just don't think baseball is meant to be looked at that way. So it's a fair question for sure. I think the most important stretch of the season is the one that counts towards elimination or moving on. And that's the only
Hmm.
time I care about small samples because that's the only time something really bad can happen in a small sample, in my opinion. But Gunnar, do you have any different thoughts on that?
I was going to say this to trigger you a little bit, but I was going to say the last 20 games. But even so, not to talk about our baseball career some more, I know no one gives an absolute crap about what we did or didn't do, but because we have a little experience playing baseball, we weren't always on the best teams or had the best stretches at times. But thinking about some of those times that we didn't have even the best stretches, baseball is so random where literally the next game we had games where we were competing with against top teams in our division, conference, whatever. We either lost those barely, but we put up a fight or we beat those teams. Baseball is random all the time. Like you always have a chance the next day. Your next at bat, you got a chance. The next game, you have a chance. It's all gets wiped clean slate, which that's the playoffs in this scenario. So I would say that momentum does slightly matter if you don't want bad vibes going into the playoffs necessarily. Um, 2018, we had immaculate vibes because we won all those games going into the playoffs. Um, if anything, I was probably in that sense, I was worried about like gassing out because we were winning so many games. Like it's not even possible to win this many games in a row. We're going to make it to the World Series doing this, and we almost did. Um,
George
so
Woods
I,
agreed.
yeah. So, um, I just think in that's the opposite end of the spectrum too. It's so random. It doesn't really matter to me, but yeah, I mean, you hope for good vibes, and maybe we can answer this better if we actually looked at the schedule. But yeah, I just don't. Even so, it doesn't really matter. Like you said, we lost even that 2018 season. I know I'm rambling now, but what was that Pirates stretch where we lost
Five
how
games
many
in 4 days
games?
we lost. Yeah.
Yeah, and it seemed like a nightmare. We were, oh my gosh, this is 2014 again. We're going to crumble, and did not happen in the slightest. So it just doesn't matter in baseball, and people don't want to hear that answer, like you said. But um, yeah, I guess that's the best way to put it, unfortunately.
Yeah. Instead, we were playing the long game with that Pirates series, forcing them to trade Austin Meadows and Tyler Glasnow and Shane Baz for Chris Archer. And that series is absolutely what pushed them to make that trade. So we were just
Austin Meadows free agent right now, by the way, too.
yeah. Oh, yeah, that didn't work out as much as I thought at the time it was going to, but the Rays still did pretty well in the end in that trade. So,
Hmm.
um, yeah, no. I mean, if I had to give you an answer, I would agree with you that I think the last 10 to 20 games is the most important just because like I said, I somewhat believe in momentum. I just think that it's been proven over time that it really doesn't make that much of a difference. I do think in 2018 they legitimately were riding that wave until they lost game two. And then it
Hmm.
felt like things just kind of changed after that. So being hot at the right time is absolutely important. I just think that being hot in the playoffs is really when that matters instead of at any point in the regular season. You just got to win enough games to get in. Okay, Patrick also asked us, what was the best offseason transaction in your mind? So we've talked about a decent amount of them on this episode. Gunnar, what was your I wouldn't say favorite. What do you think is the best one, the one that's going to impact the team the most going forward?
Hmm. The two obvious answers, Hoskins, of course, that's going to be a big one for people. The Burns trade, getting Hall and Ortiz. I mentioned Dunn. I think that's my favorite, just because of the swing it could bring and what we gave up in the trade period. I think we're going to get, it's a positive trade, in my opinion, just on paper, and then what it could mean for our team that's positive. And then sort of in a similar way, Sanchez, I think, is pretty big too. I didn't love Victor Caratini. I know Corbin Burns, that was his I don't know what you
Boy,
would call him. Yeah. Yeah, his boy, I
personal
guess is the
catcher.
best way to put it. But um I didn't love him, and I think that upgrade in itself is going to be huge for us offensively, even if we assume he's a pretty decent catcher anyways, but we'll work on that regardless. So the swings there, I think, are the biggest swings and are the most positive for the Brewers. But did you have anybody besides those guys or
No, I guess I'll cheat. I think the best offseason transaction is the Churio extension. I do think
Sure?
that long term is going to be the biggest payoff and the most that they're going to get out of it. And I think it just brought the most excitement of anything too in a lot of ways, which was an important part. I think the Brewers needed a jolt of excitement from the fan base at the time that they made that deal. So that'll be my answer for that one. But Patrick had one more question. I think this one's just probably for me, but biggest change positively or negatively in your prospect rankings from 2023 to 2024. So I'm taking it
You think
mostly
this
as
one's for you? You think I have a secret prospect rankings that I haven't told you about?
um I'm taking the question as more of like a from the beginning of last year to the beginning of this year, not from the end because not much has changed over winter. But I guess negatively, and these are honestly funny enough, the negatively answer I'm going to give here is somebody I still like a lot, and that's Cameron Wagoner. I had him in my top 30 at the end of or at the beginning of last year, and he really, really struggled to start the year. And I didn't really love the way they were going with his pitch mix. And then halfway through the season, he looked a lot more like what I was expecting and a lot more like the pitcher I thought he could be. So right now, he's down my rankings quite a bit from where he was last year, but I had kind of have a feeling he's going to bump himself back up this upcoming year. And then I think the biggest jump positively, I don't know who that would have been. I mean, kind of a cop out here, but Brock Wilken jumped up a ton from it's hard to jump from like outside the top 10 into my top five like he did. It's not a huge jump in terms of numbers because you just can't go that high from being around the top 10. But
Yofri, what's that guy's name? Did he hop up for you?
Yoferi Rodriguez,
Yeah.
he did. He did. He was another one I was thinking about there. He went from like I think I had him around 20 to start the year and he's 9 right now. So he jumped
Hmm.
a decent amount. Um, it's hard to pick draft picks like I am with Wilkin, but he jumped just because I genuinely like I love that pick now. I was down on the pick when it happened, and I think they killed it now. Like he looks unbelievably good, even in Major League Spring Training right now. When he's getting at bats, he does not look out of place at all. He's not making the roster out of spring, but if he was on the 40 man, he
Some
might.
people think he is because
Oh,
he's
I
hitting
know.
700 right now.
I know. He's not making it, but if he was like a 40-man roster guy and performing the way he is, he would probably make the roster out of spring,
Hmm.
even if he hadn't been above double A like he hasn't been. But I will say I think he's going to start in Nashville, which I had kind of assumed he was going to go back to Biloxi to start the year. I think he's going to be in Triple A to start the year. He looks completely out of place against the worst competition. Like he looks like a major leaguer when you see him. And I texted you a video of him hitting one day, and the guy just huge. I mean, he
Yeah.
looks like he's been a major leaguer for years, just the way he's built right now. So,
Hmm.
um, yeah, I'm very excited about him. I would say in terms of just the way I view a prospect, he jumped the most positively of any of them. Um, okay, we'll get to our dark horse candidate here. It's just a guy with a bunch of letters in his name. BDFVHHVVV asked, who do you think is a dark horse candidate to make the opening day roster? I know Gunner's answer is Oliver Dunn, so we've
Yes.
talked about that. I don't think we need to go through it again. But my answer is it. I don't know if it's as big a dark horse candidate. I think Vieira is going to make the opening day roster, and I think a lot of people didn't even think about him coming into the spring. The only other one I might throw out there is Blake Perkins, and I don't know how dark horse that is, but I think he's likely to make it over one of Mitchell or Weimer, and
Hmm.
I think people will be kind of surprised by that. He's more of a backup outfielder than they are. Like he's more built for that backup role than they are. You want those guys getting at bats. They're still prospects. They're still young. They still have the ability to figure things out more. And I think Perkins is going to make the roster. And I think a lot of people are kind of counting on him to be in AAA. Well, those two and Frelick and Churio and all these guys are in the majors. I just think he's probably going to take the spot of one of them just because of it's a more comfortable role for him than it's going to be for those other guys. So maybe that's my pick. Like I said, I don't know if that's really that dark horse, but I don't know if either of them are, but Oliver Dunn probably would have been my pick too. So he's the guy we've talked about before. But yeah, that's what I'm going with. But speaking of Weimer, and I actually got a ton of likes on this tweet, which was great. I love when that happens. But um, Joey Weimer kind of he made a change to a swing and really more to his load and his setup and everything. But my view on the Weimer swing change, Jake McKibben asked, "What is your view on the Joey Weimer swing change, and who does Gunner think it resembles?" So I'll let you talk about that in a second. But my view on it is that it needed to change. Now, I'm not sure it's perfect right now, but I think it has been simplified dramatically. And the dropping of the hands to the waist with the barrel tipping all the way down to like a 90-degree angle was just unreal. It didn't make any sense. I mean, I wrote an article for Brewer Fanatic about it showing the difference between even just 2022 in AAA versus what he was doing at some points last year, and it was unreal. And to me, the biggest thing he had to change was just making it easier to get into those positions that you talk about all the time, Gunnar, where there's not that much movement to get to the spot that he needs to get to, because timing wise, how are you going to repeat what he was doing? Now, I know you probably think there's still too many moving parts, just a lot fewer, but I think, and I don't disagree with that. I do think, especially I saw him in the game yesterday or 2 days ago or whenever it was on TV. And from that front angle, it was like, there's still a decent amount of moving the hands and stuff going on. It was easier to see from that angle, but it definitely looks more repeatable and more plausible for somebody to at least have that stance
Hmm.
and that swing. But Gunnar, you threw a couple names out. I saw a lot of people kind of throwing names out on Twitter, but who do you think it resembles, and what are your overall thoughts on the swing change?
Yeah. I wish I had a more niche answer he talked about. I think a lot of people hit this one exactly on the head. Aaron Judge was the guy that everyone sort of poked at and said this is definitely the guy who it seems like now with this how short the swing looked. And I told you I don't necessarily love that, but the fact that he is such a strong guy, I don't think that's actually necessarily a bad thing. Like Aaron Judge, he had 60 home runs and he has probably the shortest swing in baseball. It's kind of incredible. Um, but that's just because they're strong and they can get to that bad path fast. And then that's all they need is just get in a good spot and then swing. But I didn't get a chance to see him in the game either. So if you're saying that there's still too much movement, maybe that's going to be the tough part is eliminating those habits and just trying to get into those easy to go spots as best he can to create more success, just making it easier for him. But I thought it was funny with your tweet how many likes it got because one, great, you point out a great thing, but it's funny to think how many people noticed like his swing last year.
Yeah,
Like 1,000 people were that excited that Joey Swiemer changed his swing. It's a credit to Brewers fans, honestly, that many people care about those little things. I think that's
yeah,
actually really cool. Because you just think that's such a niche thing that people probably wouldn't care about on a day to day, but that was just cool. Is basically what I took away from that part of it. And the weird thing about last year, again, I'm rambling, but some people thought I saw this take and it was getting like ratioed in the favor of people with this take that he didn't have to change his swing last year because he was a rookie and why would you mess with it? And people were like ratioing other people with that take. I don't know if I agree with that because he had what 400 at bats. Like I
yeah,
think he had so many chances to show some life. Like he didn't never really got in a good stretch. He started out pretty good. Um, but then once the pitching catches up to you as it didn't take much because of how much moving parts there were. And to not have a counter punch and not have any change, it actually went counter. If he changed, it got in the worst part of it. Like you said,
yeah,
the hands were getting lower, the bat was getting in a worse spot from changing, if he did it all. So he definitely needed to change if he wanted to make an impact on the roster at the end of the year last year, and he never really did it. He got every chance in the world to do it. Me and you were constantly talking about it. Like, how are you not just giving him some extra tips? I know it's iffy that you don't want to mess with it during the year, but him being young and he was going to AAA anyways, and he did work on it when he went to AAA too. He changed it when he went down there, which is good. That was probably their thinking was like once he goes on the AAA and then it's time to do it. But he just got such a long leash that it became like okay, like what are it's almost I was scared that it was actually going to this I can't think of the word, but it was going to hurt him in the long run if you're just creating bad habits for that
yeah,
long. But hopefully he fixed it, and that's what spring training is for, trying to get rid of those bad habits. So he's got all the month to figure that out.
yeah, yeah. No, I think it was a change that had to be made. I don't know if it's exactly what we would be hoping for, but I do think, as I said, when he went down to AAA, I think it ups the odds of him being a major league hitter the more he simplifies things. And you still got to let him be him. I think we overlook that sometimes. Like a freak athlete like Joey got to the major leagues doing what he was doing. Unfortunately, at the major leagues, he just went to a completely different level with it. And that's when the struggle started. And if he can simplify it even a little bit further than what it was in the minors and still have the bat speed and the athleticism in the swing, because it's a super athletic swing, then maybe you get the breakout. And there's a real, I mean, there's a 30-30 type player in Joey Weimer. He's not super
Hmm.
likely to hit that, but that type of potential exists with really, really good defense and a cannon of an arm. I mean, there's as much potential as anybody in the entire system with Joey Weimer. He's if he didn't have the weird swing, he would have been a first round pick. I That's really what if he had a perfect swing, he probably would have been a top 10 pick in that draft because everything else about him points to a guy who's a really good baseball player. Uh, yeah, I think that kind of covers all the questions we got. I think at the time when we got the questions, we were like, oh, we're going to need questions to get us through. Gunnar, we talked so much that we didn't even need these questions, but we're always happy to take questions and we'll answer as many of them as we can. I am not answering Grober's question about the Fanatic pants, but we can talk about the pants because the pants are an issue, and I don't know what MLB is doing, but they got to figure it out. Um, I'll answer one question from Grober. Which coaching staff member would you most like to see in the pants? And that is myself when I look in the mirror because I am beautiful. Um,
I think they'll change the pants by the season start. They cannot possibly have those white pants being worn on
yeah,
national TV constantly
no,
across the league. There's
they're
no way
they're
that's
gonna get some
possible.
sort of like sexual harassment claim if they
Yeah,
do that.
it's
Like
just not
seriously,
possible.
you're gonna see something you should not be seeing if they wear these on national TV and in these into the season. So I think they're gonna get changed too. But we'll wrap things up with a couple of quick odds and ends, some notes. The Brewers made two minor league signings over the last couple of days. Right-handed pitcher Nolan Blackwood. He's honestly, I looked into him a little bit. He kind of reminds me of what Hobie Milner was when he was signed, but from the right side. Um, it's a real sidearm type delivery, upper 80s sinker, a sweeping slider, which is kind of what Hobie was throwing when he came over, especially. And then he throws a changeup as well. He throws the changeup a decent amount, probably more than Hobie did originally, but kind of a soft contact guy. He doesn't strike out too many, get a ton of whiffs, but gets a lot of soft contact. So interesting. I wonder what they're going to try and do with them. They like to play around with these types of arms with interesting arm angles and all that stuff. I don't know too much about him, but I believe he was with the Mariners AAA team last year, and he was originally I think he's been up to I don't know if he's made his major league debut. He's been up to AAA for sure, and I think he might have made it to MLB at one point with the A's. But either way, he is at least an interesting pickup, somebody to watch. I don't know what they plan to do. I actually saw he signed with a team in Mexico, and if he doesn't, it sounds like if he doesn't make the Brewers roster, he plans to go play for the team in Mexico, which he's not making the Brewers roster. So I don't even know if we're going to have him in AAA when the season starts, but that was one of the guys. And then another right-handed pitcher, Kevin Herget, I believe is how it's pronounced. I actually remember seeing him pitch a couple times for the Reds. He's been in the majors with the Reds before. It's not been results wise, it has not been very good in the majors. He he hasn't honestly even done last year. He did not do super well in AAA for Louisville, but he did have a really good 2022 in AAA. That was as a member of the Rays organization. So whenever the Rays have a pitcher in their org, it's always interesting. They usually they know what they're looking for, and he did do quite well for them. So we'll see. It sounds like he's more of it's a four seam cutter, changeup, curveball mix. I think the cutter looks a little more. It's a cutter, but it's got more like slider velo from what I've seen of it. Um, he is working on a changeup that he's been trying to get better, and it's a really good curveball. So an interesting mix. The fastball's been up to 96, but it seems like it sits more like 92 to 94. I'm guessing he's just AAA depth, but anytime you get AAA depth with somebody who's been in the majors and has experience, worth a shot. Never know what you might figure out. Like I said, if the Rays took notice enough to have him in their system, and he did make it to the majors with the Rays as well, so they thought enough of him to give him a shot. Um, and then quickly, just a couple prospect updates as we usually do. So Baseball America came out with their positional rankings. We had seven players get mentioned on their rankings. So left-handed pitchers, DL Hall was number 5. Robert Gasser was number 6. Right-handed pitchers, Jacob Mizorowski was number 5. They did center fielders and corner outfielders. No corner outfielders, but Jackson Chourio was the number 1 center fielder. Jefferson Queiro was the number 3 catcher. Tyler Black was the number 8 third baseman. And then they did their top 25 shortstops because they have so many shortstops that they like. And Joey Ortiz came in at 21 on that. But they did have some other interesting information that I didn't know beforehand. They gave the 90th percentile exit velocity averages for it was basically like ages 17 through 20. And the Brewers actually had a lot of names pop up. So Gunnar mentioned him earlier. Yoferi Rodriguez was the 10th highest for age 17. His 90th percentile exit velo was 100.7, which anytime you're in triple digits is pretty impressive at that age. Age 19, Luke Adams was the second highest of all 19. Oh, he was tied for the highest of all 19-year-olds at 105.9 for his 90th percentile. One of my favorite prospects. Really weird looking swing. Kind of got some Weimer to him, but super interesting player that I'm going to be watching a lot as he moves up this year. And then Jackson Chourio was right behind him at 105.8. So he was tied, or he was second, I guess, behind the two tied for first. And then at age 20, I do have to throw out Junior Caminero for the Braves at 110.4 for his 90th percentile, which is unbelievable. He was the number 1 for that age, but Jefferson Queiro was 105.2, which was the fourth highest for 20-year-olds. I think he doesn't really get enough attention for the power in his bat. It's part of the reason I've been so high on him. I think he's got legit juice in the bat that could be a real power hitting catcher. But then a name that's kind of fallen off prospect radars, and Edbert Perez was on the list at 10 at 103.6. So I will say, watching him a lot last year, he was figuring things out. He was starting to look a lot. His strikeout rate was going down. He was walking more. He had started hitting the ball all fields for some power, and then he had a season-ending injury, and it came at like the worst time. It would not shock me to see him kind of recoup some of that prospect hype this season coming up. I saw Brewers Farm puts out like their top 100 Brewer prospects. They put out, I think he was somewhere in the 80s, and they always tag the players on the posts. And Edbert replied like something about like, this is going to change soon. And it was nice to see some confidence from him still, because I think the guy was put in a weird spot where everybody hyped him up so much, including myself. And then he just didn't hit the ground running. And like with Chourio, it was the opposite. He obviously kind of built the hype by hitting the ground running when he got to low A. Hedbert was given these really, really big expectations. And reality is he's still younger than the average age at his level. Like he's 20 years old playing in low A. That's just normal. But he just didn't make this huge jump right away. So it would not shock me. And I would be very happy to see him improve. He's got the juice in the bat, and he's starting to figure things out, it seems like. And he's a decent defender, and he seems like a really good teammate. So rooting for Hedbert, really hope things go well. But yeah, Gunnar, let's finish this off. This might be our longest one. I keep saying that, but I have a feeling this is going to be our longest one. This is going to be longer than we should ever be putting out episodes for. But Gunnar, why don't you give me a random Brewer?
I picked Brady Clark. As a kid, I remember thinking this guy has a high batting average. He plays center field. He must be good, right? And he had a couple of good seasons with us, I guess, solid player. But I also just connected with him because he was a white guy and I liked playing center field from time to time when I was a kid. So I connected with him, and one of my favorite-ish players, I guess I could say. I enjoyed watching him at that time. I was super young. Obviously, I didn't know much, but you have weird fan favorites as kids. So I
Oh, yeah.
remember him vividly watching him playing. So who's your guy?
Yeah. Clark he had better seasons than I would have guessed, honestly, looking back. He had
Hmm.
two seasons with an OPS plus over 100 for the Brewers. Um, no, I will quickly on Brady Clark. All I remember of him really is that he played the most shallow outfield or center field I've ever seen a major leaguer play. Like he was just, and the reason was that he was terrible at coming in on the ball, but he was great at going back on it. So he played super shallow and still ran stuff down. He was a solid player. He had a pretty nice prime. And then I'm choosing Keith Ginter here. Um, Frankly, I barely remember Keith Ginter. I do remember his second season a little bit, or his second and third season with the Brewers, I should say, in 03, 04. He he actually had a really good 2004, better than I would have guessed. He had a 812 OPS, he hit 19 homers. He actually got traded that offseason for Nelson Cruz. That was how we got Nelson Cruz, was for Keith Ginter from the A's. So the A's also gave up on Nelson Cruz. Keep that in mind, everybody. And then he went to Oakland and had a 497 OPS and he never played in the majors again after that. So weird career for Keith Ginter, but I had to use him because Michael Barnes asked me to use him. He's Michael's favorite player from he had a picture of him and his brother with Keith Ginter and I do remember Keith Ginter and I remember thinking, "Oh, he's pretty good" when I was a kid, but I didn't know we traded him for Nelson Cruz. I didn't know any of that until I looked him up a little bit here. So um yeah, no, he better 2 year stretch than I would have thought before I looked at the stats for sure. Kind of like Brady Clark, I guess.
Hmm.
Yeah, I think that's it. So we will see how much we can cut this down as we post it, and we'll see what we got. But for those of you who stuck around and are listening still, please like and subscribe on whatever platform you are on. Remember to follow us on Twitter at the Cream City Pod, and please feel free to leave feedback for us on how we can get better. Perhaps that is stop talking for 2 hours. Thank you all for listening, and we will see you next time.
So, yeah.